the local standard lunches there were never less than $6, $7, $8, and the average was 8 to 10 to 12. Whereas here, I mean, I've seen them less than $3, which is half the price of what I just mentioned in Costa Rica, and it goes up to the average 4, 5, 6, 7. The culture shock is probably the least in Panama compared to the rest of Latin America. There's also an area that distinguishes Panama from Costa Rica, and that is the Carnival. Roads that turn into a one vehicle width bridge that is everywhere in Costa Rica. Welcome back to Generic Expats. Today we find ourselves on February 8th, Monday at around 4:30 at a park called Paitilla Park in the capital city of Panama, Panama City. The area we're looking at here, the viewpoint, is called the Punta Pacifica, which means the Pacific point of the city. And this is an area that has a lot of story, a lot of background, a lot of things to talk about. I'm not going to get into that today. Today, my friends, we're going to be comparing Panama, and I'll be giving my first impressions of this country and the cities I've been in. I've only been here for less than a week, therefore I can't give a very detailed description or idea of what's happening and what is here compared to the rest of Central America. But I'm going to give you my honest perspective and comparison of Panama versus the rest of Central America, and maybe more specifically Costa Rica being the neighbor and maybe most similar country nearby. We're going to talk about the development, we're going to talk about the culture, we're going to talk about the cost, and that's it today. We're going to finish it off at that. So starting with development. Today we'll start with development and talk about what we see here behind us. As I mentioned, this is Punta Pacifica, and this is not the only area in Panama City that has this amazing skyline view and very luxurious, developed city view. There are many parts of the city, a huge part of the city, and specifically this area, O Barrio, are all basically like this. It's phenomenal. Very surprising to me. I wasn't expecting to see quite so much luxury and wealth in this city. The other towns and cities I went to did seem pretty developed and seemed like they were pretty fluid in terms of their transportation, in terms of the infrastructure was quite nicely built, and that's another part of the development I'm going to talk a little bit about after this. Now, development in other countries, in, for example, Costa Rica, there are areas that are quite nice like this, but they're very small and there's not that many from what I saw. Of course, I didn't go to every corner of all of Costa Rica, and there might be cities and towns that I didn't even go to that are quite developed and that have a similar view and skyline of what we are seeing here. However, from what I saw, there was a very small amount of what you can see here in Panama, right in this tiny little area of the city. Moving on to the roads and infrastructure. This country has completely blown me away, surprised me in the best possible manner. Due to my drive from Almirante, which is kind of the northwestern border with Costa Rica, where I crossed over in Sixaola, I drove over through the Caribbean side of that road. Was pretty terrible, lots of potholes and pretty similar, not as bad as Monteverde and Costa Rica, but not good at all. Very, very difficult to drive, especially if you don't have a car with some clearance. I drove it on my motorcycle and it wasn't difficult for me, so that's another massive benefit of driving a motorcycle through Latin America, is having that clearance and not having to worry as much about dodging these massive holes everywhere with 4 different wheels. That wasn't great in that one specific spot, but leaving that area going onto the highway, which crosses over the mountains that leads to Boquete and David, was fantastic. Phenomenal road and very beautiful area. A place that was recommended by many people that I talked to. A guy in Costa Rica I met, and then some cool French girls I met in the islands of Bocas del Toro. That road was fantastic. Then the road from David over to Panama City was also amazing, up until basically the satellite cities and the suburbs, where there is an insane amount of construction. Now, this goes to development as well. This is another part of what makes a city very livable and great with fluidity of traffic and people and movement. That is supposedly going to be a metro and some new roads, and it is developing quickly. There's a ton of construction and made driving there very difficult, but that is a good sign for the future that this entire city and its metro and the suburbs and the satellite cities are developing so quickly and with so much infrastructure. In the future, they're going to be very powerful, they're going to be very good to live in, and that's just something I saw there, which I didn't see in Costa Rica and in a lot of the countries I was passing through on the way coming here in Central America. Costa Rica did seem pretty decently developed. The roads weren't great in a lot of the capital city suburbs. However, it was pretty manageable. The roads outside of the capital, and many of them were not great, but they were manageable as well. One thing that was very common there that I haven't seen here is roads that turn into a one vehicle width bridge. That is everywhere in Costa Rica. It's such a weird thing. The bridges, they narrow down into one single lane, and cars have to take turns going across the bridge, and it's almost everywhere. Even in the capital city, it's everywhere. So that's kind of a very Costa Rican thing. I haven't seen that in Panama yet. So the development of this country is quite superb to pretty much everything that I've seen so far in Central America. So props to you, Panama. That is an amazing thing for the country to have. When it's very developed, it gives a lot of benefits for people wanting to live here. Now, another thing that people want as a benefit, and then my next topic, is the cost of living. It has recently come to my attention that I have not given the proper introduction to tell you why my videos and my information is so useful. You see, I've been traveling since 2013, nearly non-stop. Many of it has been within Asia and Latin America. I spent 5 years in Vietnam. And just 5 years ago, I started my full-time lifestyle as the digital nomad that I am today, where I spent at least 1 month in the following countries: Argentina, Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And in this time, I've been doing everything that I've been bringing to my channel here at Generic Expats. Now, what this means is that I've been arranging my own accommodation and tasting the local cuisine, checking out the cost of living, looking for entertainment options, checking to see if these places are dangerous, learning how the weather is, and just the overall well-being of a foreign expat living in each one of these. Cost of living in this country is surprisingly low, and way lower than I was expecting. People always talk about Panama being this super expensive place next to Costa Rica. Both are super expensive, and they're just, oh my God, they're the most expensive places in Latin America, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to say that I totally agree with that, because I did see those prices in Costa Rica. However, here I'm not seeing the same thing. It's about half the price of what I remember paying for most things in Costa Rica. When you match the development with the lower cost of living, for me, if someone's trying to choose between the two countries, it's a no-brainer to me. I would say, well, it's more developed and it has a cheaper cost of living. You can pay for way more things with the same amount of money. I would definitely say if someone was in that struggle now, they're trying to decide what country they want to live in between the two, I'd say Costa Rica is fantastic, but it is to a point where the prices are so high, and from what I understand, it's from a lot of protectionism, which is high taxes on things that are not produced in Costa Rica, which is basically everything. I'm not sure how many things Costa Rica makes. There are some hot sauces I remember buying from there, maybe rice and beans. I'm not sure exactly what else, but even That being said, the local standard lunches there were never less than $6, $7, $8, and the average was 8 to 10 to 12. Whereas here, I mean, I've seen them less than $3, which is half the price of what I just mentioned in Costa Rica, and it goes up to the average 4, 5, 6, 7, I think, for the standard basic lunch. So just with the lunch being compared, that's already half the price. Another thing that I mentioned about Costa Rica was their high taxes, and that is another benefit from Panama. From what I understand, the taxes are way lower, or some of the lowest in parts of Latin America. Therefore, there are really competitive prices for technology, for cars, and this is another part of the country that is very unique, and that's going to be talked about a bit more in culture, but there's a lot more cars here. There's almost no motorcycles here, and it's kind of interesting. And there's way more motorcycles in Costa Rica and everywhere else in Latin America and Central America, going up to Mexico and in Mexico. Just amazing amounts, just crazy amounts of motorcycles, whereas here I'm one of the very, very few I've seen so far. Costa Rica does have motorcycles, but there's a huge percentage, or not a huge, but a big percentage of them are actually luxury motorcycles. The cost of getting luxury motorcycles there must be very, very high from the high taxes, and I'm surprised there aren't many luxury motorcycles here. And from what I understand, I've been told that it's just so easy to get loans for cars, and cars are so readily available that practically anyone can afford and get a loan for a car and have that as their transportation option. So this is another part of both cost of living and development, as you use your vehicle to drive the roads of the infrastructure to get around, and they're pretty superior here in Panama, both the development infrastructure as well as the costs of buying a vehicle. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is culture. Culture is an interesting part, as Panama is way, way more Americanized due to the lengthy history with the United States that Costa Rica does not share. Costa Rica has a very unique type of cultural connection with the U.S. They have been bringing in tourists from the U.S. and Canada for many, many, many years, and from what I understand is the cream of their crop. It's one of the huge reasons why their economy is doing so well. They're really taking advantage of putting out a ton of marketing for being the best place to visit in Central America and in Latin America, and people are flying in direct flights to come spend their holidays there, to check out the national parks and to go to some of the most talked about areas that I visited when my sister and my mom were here, which were Tamarindo, Monteverde, La Fortuna. People fly in, and a lot of people do that exact same tour. So yeah, marketing well done by Costa Rica to have the tourists come in. Panama doesn't have that type of culture, that type of economy, that type of drive to bring in tourists, but they do have a crazy amount of American culture from the canal. So let's go back to Costa Rica. The reason why I mentioned that they have an interesting connection is because if you are in San Jose, the people that live in this area, they have a very unique accent, and they actually talk like people from the US or Canada would speak Spanish if they're just learning Spanish, and it's something I actually do sometimes. I actually do make this type of pronunciation, and it's more of a joke, but it's actually the standard way of talking in Costa Rica, which is very interesting. I grew to like it quite a bit. I really thought it was quite interesting. Their R's, which for me, I can't even roll my R's very well, because some people just are born without that amount of muscles in their tongue to do the that sounds more natural than mine. The R's in Costa Rica and in San Jose are regular R's in English. So Costa Rica, te gusta la rica comida? So stuff like that is very interesting, endearing, and cute. However, the accents I've heard so far here from the local people are not anything to do with this particular R sound from American English. So it's quite interesting as well to hear that. I wasn't expecting that when I went to Costa Rica. I thought they were at first maybe joking, but it was the real truth. So culture is an interesting part of how Costa Rica and Panama both have a pretty strong influence from the U.S., whereas obviously Panama is far, far, far stronger and more of an influence from the Panama Canal. Now, the canal was undertaken by the French before the U.S., but from what I understand, a lot of them got sick and they didn't have the vaccines for some of the fevers. I think it was yellow fever and whatever, took them out of the race, or out of the potential for building this superstructure, this area of transit for the world. So the U.S. came in and they got their engineers and they got vaccines, and they decided to go all the way, and they did, and they built the canal. And this is a part of the cultural aspect of Panama being super Americanized. The U.S. actually owned a part of Panama for many, many years after the canal was built. They signed an agreement and then gave it back to Panama at a certain point. I don't know the exact year, but there has been some interesting history in Panama. So if you're interested in history and you want to check that out, there has been some dictatorships and there has been some interesting changes from the U.S. back to Panama. So definitely check that out if you're interested in checking out the history. There are some good geography channels on YouTube that I can suggest as well that I like watching. I'll put that in the description if I can find those videos. So the cultural connection with Panama to the U.S. is very beneficial for Americans and for Canadians that want to come down here, because the culture shock, as many YouTubers in Latin America know, is probably the least in Panama compared to the rest of Latin America, due to this influence and having the U.S. being here for so long, changing the customs and making things a bit more similar to where I'm from, the U.S., and back home for Americans. So that's going to be something that's very beneficial, and that is going to be a cultural difference that Panama pretty much dominates in terms of Latin America being a very Americanized area. Of course, there are many Americanized places, for example, parts of Mexico, Cancun and whatnot, is going to have that similar thing going on, but that is just one tiny area, whereas Panama City is a huge city, tons of wealth. As you can see behind me, this Punta Pacifica just boasts wealth, and there's many ways that they make this money. The canal, they bring in a lot of money for bringing the boats across, and there's many other things in the history of Panama that you can also look into to understand the economy of this area. So culture is similar to American in some ways, in many ways, but there's also an area that distinguishes Panama from Costa Rica, and that is the carnival. What to expect? Carnival, Panama City. Which is actually going to be starting the next few days, tomorrow or the next day. Carnival is a celebration that's huge in Mazatlan, for example, in Mexico. I think the biggest one is in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. I've celebrated it there. I've celebrated in Salvador da Bahia in Brazil as well, and Florianopolis. And Brazil has some of the best carnivals I've ever been to. There is supposedly a pretty awesome carnival celebration here. Now it's happening from I think around the 9th or 10th until the 13th, 14th, 15th, somewhere around a week. And that is something that Costa Rica does not share. Surprisingly, they do not have this particular party being a big part of their culture. This is going to be happening within the actual city limits, within the capital city here of Panama. Therefore, Costa Rica and San Jose, when I talked to people about that, they said, no, that's definitely not a thing here. There could be areas of the Central American Caribbean coast that has a lot of influence from Africa. Sometimes those areas, they celebrate a bit more of these type of festivals, as from what I understand, Carnival is kind of a mixture of Christianity with some other types of local religions, sometimes based with African influences as well. So with the culture of Panama being kind of an interesting mix of like very Americanized, but also quite a bit attached to the Latino origins that it has. It's a very cool mix, and I'm very excited to be part of it and see this celebration coming up within these next few days. I'm going to be staying here in Panama for the next 3, 4, 5 weeks until I send my motorcycle over to Colombia, as that is going to be my next stop, and that's going to be the beginning of Chapter 2, which is going to be South America. Chapter 1 is now ending with Panama. I have tons and tons of videos on the back burner, stuff that I made just weeks, months ago that I need to produce, and there's some really good ones in Central America with some really amazing people that I met. We did some great content in Nicaragua, tons of great people, and some other countries as well. I need to produce that and give that to you guys. So that's coming up in the future. So that is going to be the end of my summary of my first impressions and talking about the differences between Panama and Costa Rica and the rest of Central America, talking about development, cost of living, and culture. Guys, if you're enjoying the content I'm giving you good ideas, interesting entertainment or information, or just showing you some cool backgrounds of places that you want to visit at some point, please drop some comments, tell me what you liked, give me some thumbs up and likes. Go ahead, smash that button to get the notifications in the future. And if you want to contribute to the channel, there's a Buy Me a Coffee as well as PayPal link in the description, guys. I really want to thank you for watching this video and partaking in my journey so far in chapter number 1 in Central America, and hasta la próxima.